Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for April 14th, 2018, ninth year of Cheongi, the second month and the 29th day now by the heavenly calendar. We're here. Unfortunately, we are going to be reporting a lot about Syria this morning. President Trump, together with France and UK, launched a series of attacks on Syria during the night. Lasted for about an hour, it seems, so the attacks are no longer continuing at this hour, but we'll be going into that. First, let's go to the weather. Right now, it is a very comfortable morning, 51 degrees, mostly clear at the palace, and we're expecting to get to 71 degrees today, warm with some sun, but enjoy it while it can, because this is the second and last day of this May-like temperature. Tonight, the temperature is going to plunge to a low of 38 degrees. And tomorrow, the high temperature, will be not too different from what it is right now. That will be it's the low today, but the high tomorrow. And so, but it'll be pretty much a normal April day tomorrow. And then Monday, when we are having our True Parents' Day celebration, it'll be 56 degrees for a high, 34 for a low during the night, and some rain from a Sunday night into Monday. All right, let's get into the news on Syria right now. Drudge has the headline, "Bombs Away," and Russia is warning. Right now, the time in Moscow is 2 minutes after noon, 12 noon, and also in Damascus, Syria as well. It's 2 minutes after 12 noon, and it's 2 minutes after 10 o'clock in the morning in London. So we have a lot of a morning after reaction as well from those locations. So we'll be looking at what happened during the night and also what the reaction is. First, let's go to the story here, the initial story. This is on NBC News. Trump announced a strike on Syria following suspected chemical weapons attack by Assad forces. And Assad regime did not get the message last year, Defense Secretary Mattis said. This time our allies and we have struck harder. And it seems that about twice as many missiles were used this time as last. 59 years ago, when President Trump attacked the Syrian airbase, from which it was alleged that a chemical attack was launched. I think 59 or so missiles were used. At this time, 120, something like 120 were used. So the number of missiles used was about double the size of last year. But also, Syria seems to have been able to shoot down a certain number of those missiles. We don't know exactly how many. Russia says a majority. Anyway, well, it's U.S. is not commenting. It does say that some missiles may have been shot down, but it's not commenting on how many. Also, important thing is that apparently the bases and facilities that were targeted had been evacuated previous to this attack. Syria says that it was warned by Russia that this kind of an attack was coming, and so people were evacuated. So far, at least, it seems that human casualties are not high, but we'll have to see what kind of information comes out about that as time goes on. Anyway, let's go through this in order. President Donald Trump on Friday ordered the United States military, in conjunction with France and the United Kingdom, to launch strikes on Syria in retaliation for a suspected chemical weapons attack by the regime of President Bashar al-Assad on a Damascus suburb last week. The president did not specify the target for the strikes, but said the United States would aim to hit sites associated with the chemical weapons capabilities of Assad's regime. We are prepared to sustain this response until the Syrian regime stops its use of prohibited chemical agents, Trump said in remarks from the White House, adding that the U.S. and its allies had marshaled their righteous power. Trump urged Iran and Russia to withdraw their support for what he called Syria's barbarism and brutality. In a direct address to the two countries, he asked what kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men and women and children. At a news conference at the Pentagon later on Friday, Defense Secretary James Mattis described the strikes as, quote, a little over double the weapons used by the Trump administration to carry out a similar attack 1 year ago. The April 2017 attack consisted of 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles. Clearly, the Assad regime did not get the message last year, Mattis said. This time our allies and we have struck harder. Together we have sent a clear message to Assad and his murderous lieutenants that they should not perpetrate another chemical weapons attack for which they will be held accountable. And Mattis said the strike was a single shot aimed to deter the Syrian regime from using chemical weapons. Whether the United States and its allies will pursue further action in Syria would depend on Mr. Assad should he decide to use more chemical weapons in the future, the secretary said. General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the U.S. and its partners launched the attack at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So that would have been 4 a.m. Damascus time, and struck multiple targets associated with the Syria's chemical weapons program. Those targets included a scientific research center in Damascus, a chemical weapons storage facility near Homs, Syria, and a chemical weapons equipment and military outpost close to the second target. Dunford explained that the U.S. identified the targets to mitigate collateral damage, civilian casualties, and the risk of Russian forces being involved. The risk of the latter was diminished, Dunford said, by using normal deconfliction channels to deconflict the airspace that we were using, which he said were used routinely with Russian and other international parties. He also said that the U.S. had noticed surface-to-air missile activity from the Assad regime. Mattis also noted his concern that false information would be spread after the U.S. attack. Based on recent experience, he said, at the conclusion of his remarks, we fully expect a significant disinformation campaign over the coming days by those who have aligned themselves with the Assad regime. There will be further details in the morning, Mattis and Dunford said. In wartime, forgotten who said this, but it's often said that truth is the first casualty. So in reading stories about war and military actions like this, we need to really sort of take everything with a grain of salt from both sides. And later on, I'm going to go through some information from Al Jazeera, for example, which may conflict with what we're reading now. But we just need to sort of put everything in the mix and try to make our own judgment as to who to believe and to what extent to believe, and sort of pick through these things to try and figure out what's actually happening. Meanwhile, in Syria, explosions were being heard to the east, west, and south of Damascus, and witnesses saw blasts surrounding much of the Syrian capital. And a huge fire could be seen from a distance to the east. An Associated Press reporter in Damascus said the attacks turned the sky orange. The British Armed Forces said they scrambled 4 Royal Air Force Tornado GR-4s to launch Storm Shadow missiles at a missile facility where the Syrian regime is believed to be storing chemical weapons. The speed with which we are acting is essential in cooperating with our partners to alleviate further humanitarian suffering and to maintain the vital security of our operations, UK Prime Minister Theresa May said in a statement. This is the first time as Prime Minister that I have had to take the decision to commit our armed forces to combat, and it is not a decision I have taken lightly. French President Emmanuel Macron agreed with May's sentiment and said the red line set by France in May 2017 has been crossed. We cannot tolerate the trivialization of the use of chemical weapons, which is an immediate danger for the Syrian people and for our collective security, he added. The suspected nerve agent attack in the city of Douma in eastern Ghouta on April 7th killed dozens of people, including children. Local activists have told NBC News. Syria and Russia have denied any involvement in the alleged attack. Upward of 500,000 people are thought to have died in the 7-year Syria civil war. a conflict that has also driven millions from their homes. The war has sucked in a number of actors, including Russia, Iran, and Iran-backed Lebanese militia Hezbollah on the side of Assad. Russia's 2015 decision to enter the conflict, backing Assad, turned the tide of the war and helped government forces recapture much of the territory held by rebels. Trump has both in the past and recently expressed eagerness to get all American troops out of Syria, but he described the latest alleged attack as mindless in a series of tweets last weekend. And in an unusual criticism of Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, he said, "Putin, Russia and Iran are responsible for backing animal Assad. Big price to pay." Russia responded quickly to Friday's attack shortly after the strikes were reported. Again, we are being threatened, said Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov. We warned that such attacks will not be left without consequences. All responsibility for them rests with Washington, London, and Paris. Insulting the president of Russia is unacceptable and inadmissible. The U.S., the possessor of the biggest arsenal of chemical weapons, has no moral right to blame other countries. The Syrian Foreign Ministry, in a statement provided to state-run news agency Sana, said that it condemns in the strongest possible terms the brutal American, British, French aggression against it, and claimed the timing of the airstrikes is aimed to impede the work of chemical weapons inspectors. The strikes came hours before inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons were set to arrive to inspect the site of the apparent attack. A Russian state news agency TASS reported that the government compound and presidential palace in Damascus were not hit by the strikes, and it quoted the Russian Ministry of Defense as saying, "None of the cruise missiles launched by the United States and its allies entered the zones of Russian air defenses around Tartus and Maymim." Trump had previously shared his desire for a rapid withdrawal, which drew unanimous opposition from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community, who've argued that keeping the 2,000 U.S. soldiers currently in Syria is key to ensuring that the ISIS terror group does not make a comeback. So Trump says he wants to pull out. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pentagon, State Department, intelligence community unanimously oppose this, and there's a chemical attack. You can see why there's suspicion here as to what's going on here. This seems very convenient that President Trump, something happened that made President Trump change his mind and made him, caused him to go along with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Pentagon, State Department, and intelligence community, caused him to go along, in other words, with the deep state. You can see how there's a suspicion there. The president on Monday had condemned the suspected chemical attack, calling it a heinous act and saying his administration would soon make major decisions on how to respond. Last year, Trump said that the use of chemical weapons in Syria crosses a lot of lines for me. On April 6th, 2017, the Trump administration launched strikes on a Syrian government airfield in retaliation for a chemical attack in the town of Khan Sheikhoun. So that was last year, where 59 were used. Now, I want to go to an article in the Daily Mail. I'm not going to repeat the same information, but there are a couple of paragraphs down here that add some, I think, important detail. Because, let's see if I can find those paragraphs here quickly. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Not that. Yeah, so what I wanted to point out here is that here in this paragraph, the Daily Mail says, allegations of Assad's chlorine use are frequent in Syria's conflict, raising questions about whether Washington had lowered the threshold for military action in Syria by now deciding to strike after a chlorine gas attack. Last year, the United States only waged strikes on Syria after determining that more deadly sarin gas was used, and some U.S. media had reported that Washington was confident Assad had also used sarin on April 7th. Mattis, however, suggested the evidence of sarin was so far inconclusive. We are very confident that chlorine was used. We are not ruling out sarin right now, Mattis said. So, allegations of Assad's chlorine use are frequent in Syria's conflict. And also in another article, I can't pull it up right now, but Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, also said that, we have reports that Assad has used chemical weapons 50 times or something like that. So the attacks by the United States were once last year and once this year, twice. The reports of Assad's Assad's using chemical weapons are 50 times apparently. So what is special about the situation this time that made the U.S. Stage this kind of attack? So last year, what was special was that the U.S. alleged that sarin gas was used, which is more deadly than chlorine. And say, okay, we have to, because they've, not just using chlorine, but they're using sarin, we have to attack. Okay, that was last year. All right, well, let's take it at that at face value for the moment. This year, the U.S. Defense Secretary says they know that chlorine was used, but they're not ruling out sarin, which means they don't know that sarin was used. But so, and that's why Daily Mail is pointing out, I think, a very, very astutely that maybe there is a lowering of the threshold for military action in Syria. So that's an important change that the Daily Mail is pointing out. So again, what is special about this attack? Well, this attack occurred right after President Trump said that he wanted to pull out all U.S. troops from Syria. That seems to be what is special about this attack. And he said that in the face of a unanimous opposition by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the intelligence community. In other words, a unanimous opposition by the deep state. I think you can see where we're going here. So here now, the latest from AP. AP has a photograph here of Damascus at sunrise. We can see some smoke there. Early morning anyway. So in the latest on U.S.-led missile strikes on Syria. And latest is that the Russian military says Syria's Soviet-made air defense systems have shot down all 12 cruise missiles aimed at a Syrian airbase. The Russian Defense Ministry said that 12 cruise missiles have been launched at the Dumayr air base east of Damascus. It said that Syria's air defense assets have downed all of them. The ministry said that altogether more than 100 cruise and air-to-ground missiles were launched by the U.S., British, and French aircraft and Navy ships. On the U.S. side, they're saying 120, and so the Russians are saying more than 100. It did not mention the overall number of missiles intercepted by Syrian forces. The Russian military said it hasn't engaged in air defense assets at its air and naval base in Syria. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte says his government understands the military action of the 3 NATO allies in Syria because, quote, the use of chemical weapons is a serious crime the international community cannot accept, unquote. In an early morning reaction on his Twitter and Facebook feeds, Rutte said it was likely that the Syrian regime of President Bashar Assad was behind the suspected chemical attack in Douma. He also criticized Russia for using its veto at the United Nations Security Council to bring more clarity about the attack. So again, getting the full truth and the use and international legal approach against the use of chemical weapons has been stopped. We greatly regret this, he said. Well, I think what he doesn't say is that Russia also introduced a separate resolution for its version of the investigation, and that was vetoed by the U.S. and Western powers. A Syrian military statement says the U.S., Britain, and France fired 110 missiles during a joint attack on targets in Damascus and outside. Brigadier General Ali Mahoub said, who read the statement on Syrian TV, said our air defenses effectively shot down most of them. He says one of the missiles hit the scientific research center in Barza near Damascus, damaging a building in Homs. One of the missiles was derailed, injuring 3 people, he said. Mahoub said the attacks will not deter the Syrian military from its ongoing war to eradicate armed terrorists from Syrian territory. Syria's foreign ministry earlier said the attack coincides with the arrival of a fact-finding mission from the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog to inspect the site of the alleged attack in the town of Douma and aims to hinder its work. The OPCW had said that its experts would be visiting Douma on Saturday. France's foreign minister says the chemical escalation in Syria is not acceptable because it's violating the rules of war and of humanity. Jean-Yves Le Drian told reporters Saturday that the joint military operation in Syria is legitimate, limited, and proportionate. Le Drian said France has 2 priorities: fighting against the Islamic State group and restoring peace and stability in Syria. He said very soon France will launch new political initiatives. He said France is ready to work with other countries involved on a peace plan. And NATO has issued a strong statement of support for its 3 allies, which launched a military strike against Syria over the suspected chemical attack last weekend. NATO Secretary General said Saturday that the alliance considers the use of chemical weapons unacceptable. He added that those responsible must be held accountable. And the United Nations Secretary General said he is closely watching reports related to the airstrikes on Syria. Antonio Guterres said in a statement on Saturday that countries are obligated to act within the guidelines of the Charter of the United Nations and to international law in general. The United States, France, and Britain launched military strikes in Syria to punish President Bashar Assad for an apparent we know that. Any use of chemical weapons is abhorrent. The suffering it causes is horrendous. But no statement by any of these, you noticed, saying that we have proof that Assad did this. They just say that the chemical weapons are bad. But when it comes to say, okay, assuming that you're right, that there was a chemical weapons attack, who's responsible? Was it Assad? Was it the rebels trying to keep the U.S. Involved there? Russia says it was UK. That's Russia's position. The top Russian lawmaker says Moscow's response to Western strikes on Syria must be carefully considered. Emotion is not what's needed now, but professional assessment by military specialists working on the scene. But he said that the attack's meaning was clear. It's a scandalous violation of international law, and this is an attack on a sovereign state without an underlying basis. Okay, Iran is condemning it. Okay. All right. I want to go to see if I can come up with the Al Jazeera version of this story quickly. Let's see here. I was looking at it earlier this morning. It seems to have been pushed down pretty far. All right, I'm going to try and pull that up during a break. Let's go ahead and take a break now, and I will pull up Al Jazeera and see what they're saying about this.
folks. And look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casull with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though.
And welcome back to the King's Report for April 14th, 2018. We're reporting sad news this morning that despite the King's pleas, warnings, President Donald Trump has gone ahead with a military strike on Syria, and together with the UK and France, more than 120, or at least 120 missiles were launched against Syria during the night, targeting some chemical weapons facilities, military facilities apparently. The good news, I suppose, is that we have very little information so far about human casualty. We know that 3 people were wounded on the ground in one location, but so far that's the only report of human casualties that are coming in. I'm looking at Al Jazeera's website right now, aljazeera.com, ALJAZEERA.com, and their top story, not surprisingly, is the Syria strike, and in there they're giving live updates, and you can also watch their broadcast there on the website if you want. They say they go through, the initial information. The U.S. and U.K. have launched strikes on targets associated with the chemical weapons capabilities in Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump announced early on Saturday would be Al Jazeera time. In other words, they're in the Middle East, and so they're saying early on Saturday. In the U.S., it was, I believe, 9 p.m. Eastern time that this was announced, and that would have been 4 a.m. Damascus time. Damascus being the capital of Syria. And so here, Al Jazeera's latest update, France says it fired 12 missiles during Syria intervention. The French military on Saturday fired 12 missiles during its airstrikes on Syria, Defense Ministry officials said, adding there was no indication the missiles had been intercepted. And May, that's the UK Prime Minister, declines to say whether Assad can stay after missile strikes. So she was asked whether Assad could remain in power as long as he refrained from further use of chemical weapons. And to that, May said that this was about, as I have said and you have recognized, this was specifically about the use of chemical weapons. There is a wider question on the future political solution for Syria, and that is a matter that we will continue to pursue in diplomatic and political channels with our international partners and allies, May said. And then also the UK Prime Minister, May, says that the reports indicated that a barrel bomb was used in Syria, and the chemical attack on Duma, apparently that's referenced there. Germany says that the strikes were necessary and appropriate. That's Angela Merkel saying that. May saying that it was right and legal to take military action in Syria, etc. and Putin says that the strike on Syria will exacerbate the humanitarian catastrophe. UK's Corbyn should have sought parliamentary approval. Let me see if let's see here. Let me try to find a kind of an opinion or analysis piece on Al Jazeera. They seem to be pretty, at least in their English edition. Sometimes, often they report different things on their English and Arabic editions. But at least in the English edition, they seem to be pretty, trying to be pretty objective and not at all emotional. Let's see if they have any kind of an opinion piece out right now. Here's a man who says Trump's strike didn't stop Assad last year and it won't stop him now. Let's see what this is about. This is by Ibrahim al-Marashi. Let's see here. Who is he? Is an associate professor at the Department of History, California State University, San Marcos. Okay. So he's a professor in the United States and Muslim professor in the United States, I guess. And he is saying early on Saturday, the U.S., France, and U.K. launched strikes on various targets in Syria in response to an alleged chemical weapons attack by the Syrian in the Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta. A year ago, the U.S. also launched a similar missile strike after a chemical weapons attack. The outcome of both is the same, both a largely symbolic actions with little consequences on the ground. Both reveal that the U.S. does not have a long-term strategy in Syria. While U.S. President Donald Trump had suggested a possibly open-ended aerial campaign against Syria, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis stated that this was a one-off attack. The dissonance in U.S. policy to Syria reveals a lack of a coherent strategy, in contrast to Russia and Iran, which have demonstrated a steadfast determination in propping up Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. These attacks will not affect their long-term goal of victory. In this regard, the Syrian state could use chemical weapons again because their battlefield value in reaching this victory against stubborn rebel holdouts outweighs the risk of U.S. airstrikes in the future. Historically, chemical weapons allow states to defeat insurgents ensconced in mountainous or urban terrains. Since urban fighting is costly in terms of regime manpower, and since defenders usually have an advantage when in an urban setting, chemical weapons can terrorize rebels and the civilians in their territory. In the case of eastern Ghouta attacks of 2013 and 2018, the use of chemical weapons was most likely deployed to break a micro-stalemate in an area where the rebel defenses had proven to be tenacious. If the Syrian regime would need to use this weapon in the future, the benefit would outweigh the risks. The outside world might not act again, as has happened in the past, or strike, just like earlier today, with cruise missiles, which would not affect the military situation on the ground. The Russian response before last year's strike advance warning had been given to Russia, who in turn informed the Syrians that the missiles would be launched and the airfield was evacuated beforehand. This year, attention was taken not to attack sites where Russian forces could be stationed. Russia has been on edge in relation to the U.S. and Syria, especially after U.S. aircraft targeted Russian mercenaries in February. The question remains, will Russian President Vladimir Putin take 2 U.S. flights sitting down, especially after Trump taunted Russia with tweets? Surprisingly, the answer might be yes. Russia, Iran, and Syrian regimes are on the brink of victory and would not want to jeopardize the status quo by taunting the U.S. immediately with a retaliatory gesture. They might take this second symbolic Western military strike as just that and continue unimpeded with their military offensive, scoring the long-term strategic victory in a complicated proxy conflict. Standoff strikes. So last April, the U.S. launched 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at a Syrian Air Force base in the Homs province, the purported site of where the nerve agent sarin was loaded onto airplanes that attacked a village in the rebel-held Idlib province. The Saturday attack was to retaliate for the deployment of chlorine gas in the rebel-held area of Douma in eastern Ghouta. This year, British and French participated in the strike, boosting the impact of the U.S. military attack targeting Syria, striking numerous sites related to chemical weapons production and deployment instead of just one airfield. Like in 2017, the U.S. used the same Tomahawk cruise missile fired from afar by U.S. naval vessels in the Mediterranean. A slight change this year was the U.S. deployed the B-1 bomber to fire a similar version of this missile, but at a distance that meant the plane did not have to enter Syrian airspace. After both attacks, media commentary in the U.S. described the cruise missiles that struck Syria as standoff strike weapons. This terminology is used to reassure U.S., UK, and French domestic audiences that their governments are not going to introduce boots on the ground in Syria and commit themselves to a much larger conflict that could involve action against Russia. Ironically, the word standoff also reveals how the strikes have little impact on ending the cycle of killing in Syria. Standoff is not just a description of weapons, but the trio's approach to the entire conflict, attempting to dictate events on the ground safely from the air. The participation of the UK and France in the U.S. operation has had a precedent in the Middle East, beginning with the 1991 Gulf War, then Libya in 2011, and the war against ISIL, or ISIS, as we would say. They say ISIL because L stands for Levant, I think, refers to that area of the Middle East. We would say ISIS or IS or Islamic State. That group has various names in English. Operation Desert Storm was the first time the U.S. sought to shape the Middle East from the air. One could now add the UK and France as actors seeking to do the same. All three sought to prove to the international community that they would take concrete action to discipline a country that uses weapons of mass destruction. However, it is also hard to discount that the U.S. motivation for an attack differs from the UK and France's. Trump began this week facing a domestic crisis as FBI agents raided the home of his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, in the early morning of April 9th, which disappeared from the headlines with the imminent airstrikes. It would be easy to attribute to Trump's foreign policy decisions to simplistic domestic drama as news cycles change rapidly. International crises can only dominate the headlines so long. Nonetheless, the rapid fluctuations of events surrounding the White House is indicative of volatility surrounding the node of U.S. power. Well, as I said, the first casualty in war is truth, but I do find that this article is informative in a few ways. First of all, he does point out the apparent contradiction between the statement by the president and the statement by the defense secretary, Trump and Mattis. President Trump said that this could be a kind of could be ongoing. That we're going to continue this action until Assad stops using chemical weapons. Whereas later on, a little bit later, Defense Secretary Mattis came out and said, well, this was a one-off strike, and it's not continuing. So there's kind of a difference there between the White House and the Pentagon on that, and he points that out. And he says that these attacks will not affect their long-term goal. It does not, and he calls the attacks symbolic in nature, saying that they don't really change the military realities on the ground. Russia warned Syria of the attacks, and so Syria evacuated the bases or the base and facilities where the attacks were going to come. And that appears to be the reason that we're not really hearing about human casualties so far. But if that's the case, then Assad probably, would expect, also evacuated his chemical weapons stockpile. So, and this professor seems to acknowledge that that Assad may have actually committed this chemical weapons attack. He's saying that maybe there probably was a kind of a stalemate in one particular urban area, and so Assad may have used the chemical weapons to break through that stalemate. So he actually lends credence to the idea that Assad, in fact, did use chemical weapons. I find that very interesting. Wouldn't expect that to come from Al Jazeera, but that's where it's coming from. He says that historically, chemical weapons allow states to defeat insurgents ensconced in mountainous or urban terrains. Since the urban fighting is costly in terms of regime manpower, and since defenders usually have an advantage when in an urban setting, chemical weapons can terrorize rebels and the civilians in their territory. In the case of Eastern Ghouta attacks of 2013 and 2018, so he's referring also to a 2013 attack that we haven't heard about in the news recently. The use of chemical weapons was most likely deployed to break a micro-stalemate in an area where the rebel defenses had proven to be tenacious. So, that would seem to indicate that this professor writing in Al Jazeera, associate professor at the California State University, San Marcos, and I'm guessing that he has access to Arabic sites, Arabic news portals. But he's basically saying that, Assad probably did use it. And he probably used it to break a micro-stalemate in an area where the rebel defenses had proven to be tenacious. If the Syrian regime would need to use the weapons in the future, the benefit would outweigh the risks. The outside world might not act again, as has happened in the past, or strike, just like earlier today, with cruise missiles, which would not affect the military situation on the ground. That's an interesting perspective. So he's saying that these attacks were symbolic and may have been intended to cover up or sort of to overshadow the domestic situation that President Trump is facing. But I'm very intrigued by this article. I'm glad that we found it. Let's see, what else do we have in the opinion section of the Al Jazeera? I don't see anything more about the Syria situation. I guess it's still early, but we should keep on checking Al Jazeera for their take on the Syrian situation. All right. Russia warns of consequences after the attack, and this is what we are most concerned about. But I don't think Russia is going to act immediately. They seem to be wanting to take sort of a more to give themselves more the image of greater maturity. They're saying that Trump acted rashly. He acted just only 1 week after the alleged chemical attack, and they're basically taking the position that we're not going to get involved with this kind of emotion. So probably they will not do anything immediately, but we'll have to see what happens, and let's see what they're saying. Russia warns of consequences after Syria bombings in response to chemical attack insult of Vladimir Putin. This is the Russian ambassador to the United States, and Anatoly Antonov again speaking about that, and we already covered his statements. What is he doing here? Anyway, he's speaking here and says that there will be consequences. Okay. Right now we're sort of waiting to see what those consequences will be. But I think probably not anything today. Probably not anything for the next few days. I would suspect that that's the sort of the feeling that I get from the statements by the Russian side. But today, the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog is supposed to be going to the Duma attack site to see what they can find. And I'm not sure exactly what the background. This is that organization is part of the UN complex, or a lot of the United Nations has a huge number of organizations under its umbrella, and this Chemical Weapons Watchdog organization is also one of those, I believe. So we'll have to take their report with that from that perspective as well, to see what but we'll see what they can find. We'll see what they find. Here on Breitbart now, Trump bombs Syria over crimes of a monster. POTUS are prepared to sustain, but Mattis says one-time shot Dunford, a wave of airstrikes over. And over here on the right, it says administration confident Assad regime used chemical weapons to terrorize civilians. Attack confined to chemical weapons targets, double firepower from last year, escalation American pilots and manned aircraft used, wire, Russia, Trump, Hitler. Yeah, I think there was a reference to Hitler in one of the Russian statements. Let's check that out. Comparing President Trump to Hitler. That, on the one hand, they say that they don't want to get involved in emotion, but then they compare President Trump to Hitler, I guess. And U.S. lawmakers support the strike mostly. Let me see if I can find that Hitler statement. Yeah. A highly placed Russian politician is likening President Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler after the launch of airstrikes against Syria, and says he regards the action as a move against Russia. Alexander Sharin, deputy head of the State Duma's Defense Committee, said, Duma being the Russian parliament, says Trump can be called Adolf Hitler #2 of our time, because you see, he even chose the time that Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. Wow, yeah. That's proof, right? At the same time. That's according to the state news agency RIA Novosti. The Nazi forces' opening attack against the USSR in 1941 was launched around 4 a.m. And since this was also 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 a.m. Damascus and Moscow time, therefore Trump must be Hitler. All right, so I guess not everybody in Russia is taking the mature approach. I'm sorry for laughing, but hey, we have to psychologically, we can't get too enmeshed in this. We have to. Our priority is to understand exactly what's going on, so that we can make judgments to protect our interests, our families, ourselves, our families, and our communities from what is going on, and also do what we can to influence what is going on. Do what we can to influence means, in this kind of case, not very much, but we can, send messages to the White House. We can send messages to our senators and congressmen and other political leaders. But in order to do that, we need to take a kind of a step back approach, and so laughing sometimes is necessary. I'm sorry. I think that's part of the process. We cannot get too involved, and people are dying. Certainly in the chemical attack, people died. In last night's attack, I don't know if I haven't seen any report of deaths so far. I've seen a report of 3 injuries, but people are getting hurt. And bombs are falling. That's never a good thing. But we need to, at least that's how I deal with it. I just take a step back and not try not to get too emotionally enmeshed in what is happening on the ground. In the news business, one of the sort of the sayings that young reporters learn pretty early on is that stuff happens, except usually it's not. They don't use the word stuff. Another word beginning with S. Stuff happens, and that's sort of the attitude that the reporters learn to take. Hey, stuff happens, but they don't usually say stuff. All right, that's another word that begins with S. I'm sure you can guess. So this idea that Trump is Hitler is being raised in Moscow. GOP's Massey, he has no authority. So this is a question that comes up whenever the president uses military force overseas, because Congress has the sole authority to declare war, and yet we see time and again that the president deploys U.S. troops outside the country and initiates a military action like this. Representative Thomas Massey, a Republican of Kentucky, argued on Friday night that President Donald Trump has no authority to strike Syria. Congressman Massey, in reaction to the news that President Trump ordered strikes on Syrian forces, wrote, "I haven't read France's or Britain's constitution, but I've read ours, and nowhere in it is presidential authority to strike Syria." On Friday night, President Donald Trump announced that he had ordered precision missile strikes. Okay, we got that. And we know what Trump said. Well, he said, "The purpose of our action tonight is to establish a strong deterrent against the production, spread, and use of chemical weapons. Establishing this deterrent is a vital interest to the United States." Trump added in his televised press conference on Friday night that Britain and France will join the U.S. Okay. All right. So, the Kentucky seems to be becoming a hotbed of libertarianism, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But presidents go ahead and do it anyway, don't they? Mayor floats wag the dog. Democrats, Trump isn't stable. Exclusive handler, Dems ousting Missouri government governor. Okay. Okay. A lot of the material is repeated here. Mattis says it's time for civilized nations to unite. Pollock, diplomatic message to allies and enemies. Let's read his piece. I always enjoy what this person writes. Trump's Syria strike also sends diplomatic message. This is by Joel Pollock. President Donald Trump told the nation Friday evening that he had ordered precision military strikes against targets in Syria in response to Bashar al-Assad's reported use of chemical weapons against civilians in the city of Douma last weekend. In addition to the military response, the president also sent a clear diplomatic message. First, he indicated that the U.S. was launching the attacks in coordination with Britain and France. That marks a difference from last year's response to Syria's use of chemical weapons, when the U.S. acted alone in launching Tomahawk missiles against the Syrian airbase from which the chemical weapons attack had been staged. The message is clear. President Trump has the support of the free world in punishing the Assad regime. I think the difference from last year, there's a difference from last year in President Trump's and also the United States' stature in the world. Remember in 2016, when President Trump was running for president, all the European allies were basically treating him as a clown or as a joke. And even after he was elected, they kind of didn't want to have anything to do with him. And that was really, I think, a major reason why the United States, President Trump chose to act alone last year. But now the situation has changed with where President Trump has shown some, has demonstrated some capability in leadership on both the international and the domestic fronts, despite the constant haranguing and constant barrage of attacks domestically against him. He's shown quite a bit of ability to sort of put aside the harassment and move forward on objectives. And I think he's gained considerable respect for himself and for the United States during the past year. And I think that is the reason why it seems to be much easier to get UK and France involved this year. That would be my interpretation of this. Second, Trump addressed Russia and Iran directly and challenged their support for the Assad regime. In doing so, he not only put those countries on notice that their actions were bringing them into conflict with the U.S., but he also strengthened the moral basis for the military strikes against Syria. He also undermined the basis for Russian and Iranian support for Assad, whom they argue is a legitimate government defending itself against terrorism. For a century, Trump said, civilized nations have agreed that no legitimate government would use chemical weapons. As for skeptics of further U.S. involvement in Syria, the president reiterated Friday evening that he had been saying for days, even before the chemical weapons attack, namely that he wanted to bring U.S. troops home and to hand responsibility for stability in the region to local leaders. In his address to the nation, Trump was more specific, outlining his expectation that Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and others would step forward. So we'll have to see what he does over the next days and weeks about this. And we hope that he can do this. But so this is kind of a response to that University of California professor. That University of California professor says, well, you know, Syria is going to continue using chemical weapons because the benefits outweigh the risks. Especially if you have a situation in an urban area where the enemy, which is on the defending enemy, has a strong advantage, then chemical weapons are a very useful military weapon. This on that Al Jazeera. Interesting that Al Jazeera would carry that article. I can't anyway. Very much of a anyway. It's basically supporting Trump's position. But anyway, we'll see. So that is if that University of California professor is right, that is a very worrying development, because it basically says that what he's saying, if he's right, then it was saying that the Syrian government is routinely using chemical weapons, just like any other weapon, and that this will be the sort of the new normality, new norm in warfare, especially in urban warfare, because chemical weapons are useful in urban settings. And obviously, a country like North Korea is going to be looking very closely at that and watching how chemical weapons were used this time to break a mini stalemate in an urban area. I'm assuming that the University of California professor is telling us truth, facts. North Korea would be using that and say, well, look, when we attack Seoul, and it looks like chemical weapons will be effective, depending on the direction of the wind and so forth, I guess. So that's the Pollock's take on that. Bases chemical research centers around Damascus. Ryan to push Dhaka amnesty. So, all right. Okay, that's about all that we have for the Syrian attacks. Let's take a break and we'll go to other news. We'll go to our Remus first, and we'll go to other news after that. And when we come back from this break, see you in a minute.
If not
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 14th, 2018, 9th year of Chungi, the second month and the 29th day of this month by the heavenly calendar. In my Bible Rima, I'm in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning at the beginning of the chapter, verse 1. Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not. Paul was given a very big ministry, very big assignment, very big mission, basically to spread Christianity to the Gentiles. And one of my realizations in a recent Rima was that when Paul converted from Judaism to Christianity, when he, fell off that donkey and at the sight of the resurrected Jesus on the road to Damascus, he didn't just change his view of Jesus Christ. He also changed his view of the role of the Jewish people in the world and in God's providence. Whereas previous to that experience, he believed that God's salvation was for the Jewish people alone, that God was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that this was also the view of many people in the early church at the time of Paul's conversion. They felt that if someone wants to become a Christian, they first have to become a Jew. They have to have a circumcision and they have to convert to Judaism, and then they can follow Jesus. That was the view that quite a few people had, including, I believe, Peter and James and the other disciples who were in, and leaders who were in the sort of the headquarters, the world mission headquarters of the early Christian church in Jerusalem at that time. But Paul came along and he changed it completely and said, no, Christ came not just for us Jews, he came for the entire world, for Gentiles as well. And he set about to go on these missionary journeys, 3 of them, I believe, during his lifetime, to go around setting up churches, and then he wrote these letters to the churches that he had set up, and to deal with the various problems in those churches, and also to teach them about the Christian doctrine as he understood it, keeping in mind that Paul never met Jesus, or as far as we know. As far as we know, he never met Jesus while Jesus was alive. I mean, he may have been, somewhere back in the crowd somewhere, but that's possible, I suppose. But he never had a direct relationship with Jesus during Jesus' time on earth. And so you have to ask then, where does his understanding of Christian doctrine come from? There must have been an ongoing work of the Holy Spirit to teach him about the Christian doctrine. He did not have the 4 Gospels at that time to read, but he spoke with the Christian leaders at that time who had and the disciples who had actually attended Jesus directly, but also through the Holy Spirit. So with that sort of indirect knowledge of Jesus and the indirect knowledge of Jesus' doctrine, he set out to spread the Christian faith. And in reading Paul today, it's a little bit frustrating for us that he emphasized faith so much over works, whereas, as says elsewhere in the Bible, faith without works is dead. And he seems to intimate that he knew something about the issue of lineage, but he never really comes out and says that lineage is important, and that the reason that Jesus has to return is to establish God's lineage on earth. Paul does talk about us being adopted sons, as we covered in a Rima recently. Adopted sons, adopted children, the spirit of adoption. I think that wasn't that Romans 8:15? Let me just check. Yes, for ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. So Romans 8:15 talks about we're receiving the spirit of adoption. In other words, that we are, even after we meet Jesus and are saved by Jesus, we are still of a different lineage from Jesus, from God, that we are still in Satan's lineage. So that kind of reference makes me think that he must have had some inkling of the importance of lineage and the importance of changing lineage, and his preaching that we should, as much as possible, remain pure, sexually pure, until Jesus comes again. Saying that, it'd be great if people could be the way I am, meaning, single, without a woman, a spouse. But if you cannot wait, then it's better to be married than to be guilty of fornication. And so he, on the one hand, encourages people, if possible, to remain celibate until Jesus' return. Again, that seems to indicate that he understands that when Jesus returns, he's going to bless us in marriage and a holy marriage, and through that process, give us a new lineage, God's lineage. But he's not clear about that. If he understood it, he didn't have the boldness, I suppose, to actually come out and say it. And that I find disappointing and frustrating as I read Paul today. Anyway, that's Paul's, but he was a very brave man, obviously, an incredibly committed man. So he says that seeing we have this ministry, and we have received mercy, we faint not. So he never fainted. He never backed down, never backed away from his mission, but continued his mission, and was even, I believe, lost his life as a result of that. And then in the Cheonsongyong Rima, I'm in the earthly life in the spirit world. This is the chapter on, let's see, what's the title of this chapter in English? Can't quite read it there. Let's see here. We'll just do it. Yes, the human beings in the physical and spiritual worlds is the title that's been given in English. That, okay, before I get into the Rima itself, let me do one more thing about translation of divine principle terms. In the Korean divine principle, the God's cosmos is divided into two parts, right? Two parts. In English, we say I think in the most recent divine principle translation, it's the corporeal and incorporeal world, I think it's called. In Korean, it's the 유형 실제 세계 and the 무형 실제 세계. So you have the 유형 실제 means substantial. And in the older translation of divine principle, this was translated as the visible substantial world and the invisible substantial world. And I think this was corrected to corporeal and incorporeal, because people pointed out that, wait a second, it's not visible and invisible, because it's only invisible because of sin. That originally we had 5 physical senses and 5 spiritual senses, and our spiritual senses were open, and so it was actually visible that we would be able to commune with people in the spirit world and others in the spirit world through our 5 spiritual senses. So to call it invisible world is inaccurate, because that's speaking from the perspective of fallen humanity. To original humanity, to unfallen humanity, it was visible. So they changed it to corporeal and incorporeal. But that sort of, I don't know if that doesn't really solve the problem, because Hyung and Muhyung in Korean is Hyung. So Hyung is form. So more literal translation would be like a with form and without form. So it's a substantial world. Both are substantial. Both have substance. And I think that's important that I think that it's important that we understand this and that remain in the term substantial, because it's although we but in one case it says Yuhyung. Yuhyung means it has form. Muhyung means no form. So we need to understand that, I think, more clearly. Maybe some future generation can come up with a better translation of that divine principle term for the spirit world and the physical world. Anyway, this section 3.3 in chapter 1 is titled Inner Person and Outer Person. What is the original destiny of humankind? It is to enjoy perfected love and extol the values of praise and respect within the realm of God's absolute love. Humanity emerged amidst the complete union and harmony of the destinies of heaven and earth. Hence we have an invisible mind and a visible body. Well, now they use invisible, don't they? Oh, shame on them. It's only invisible if you, let's see, what is the... Oh, okay, well, yeah, Father uses invisible. 보이지 않는 마음에 있고, oh yeah, unseen mind, 보이는 몸이 있습니다, and seen body. Okay, well, all right. Father says invisible. All right. If we had been born according to our original destiny, would our body and mind be divided in conflict, or would they be in total unity? They would be in total unity. Your inner person and outer person are in conflict. When will this conflict end? After 10 years, or even by the time you die? If God had created human beings in that way, then he would not be a God with a single purpose, but a God with dual purposes. Such a God would be a chaotic God. All the laws of the universe systematically pursue a distinct purpose without being at cross purposes. From that perspective, we know that we were not originally created in this way. Let us therefore cast our body aside and seek our original mind. You know, he raises a very important point here. That is that, which is, I think, overlooked by many Christians. That is that this world that we live in now is not what God intended to create. And Father asks, Father talks about the conflict between the inner person and outer person. There's the conflict between our mind and body. And this conflict, of course, is reflected in the conflicts in our families, in our communities, in our society, nation, and world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But many Christians today, especially mainline Christians, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and so forth, will say that, the sin is simply immaturity. And this is wrong. In other words, if they say that, then that means that sin is a part of God's creative plan of creation. Their understanding is that, this is actually what I was taught in my family when I was growing up, that as people develop, as they become more mature through history, as they progress through history, they become less barbaric, less sinful, and but that sin is between the ideal that God has for humanity and the sort of the still immature current status of human beings. So, whereas a true father draws the graphic of a fall and restoration as everything is opposite in the camera, so I'm going to try to draw this opposite so that it will appear normal to you. That Adam and Eve developed, and then they fell, and then here's the course of restoration, right? But in Christianity, though, this initial peak is not there. In mainline Christianity, many Christians, this initial peak is not there. It just goes up like this from the barbaric state to more and more, progress. And that's just wrong, and that actually makes it appear that that this current world as we have it is actually part of God's plan of creation from the beginning. Whereas a true father is saying something very radically different, saying no, that we can and must create a new world, a new kingdom, where sin does not have a place. I remember Father saying that he looked forward to the day when he could offer up a cosmos, he could offer up to God a cosmos that does not have even the slightest vestige of sin. It's just make a completely pure offering of the cosmos to God. Say, here, God, here's what you intended to create, and we've done it. We've eliminated sin from the world, and this is what you wanted to create. That this is the day that he looked forward to. He said that this is the kind of world that he wanted to offer up to God. But Christianity does not have that. I say Christianity, evangelical Christianity does have that vision, but mainline Christianity does not have that vision. Instead, they acquiesce. They say, "Well, this is something that we have to put up with," and so that in order to help human beings mature, they use the power of the state. These are and the Second King rightly calls them state-run churches, state-run Christianity. Okay, I'll call it not mainline Christianity, but state-run Christianity. State-run Christianity uses the power of the state. That is their idea, to educate people, to create laws that compel people to do good. But this is fundamentally at odds with the doctrine that True Father has brought, to the truth that True Father has brought to the world. So he talks about the inner person and outer person are in conflict, and he asks, when will this conflict end? After 10 years, or even by the time you die? If God had created human beings in that way, then he would not be a God with a single purpose, but a God with a dual purpose. Such a God would be a chaotic God. So there would be a contradiction within God. If state-run Christianity's doctrine is correct, there is a contradiction within God. How can God intend to create a world like we have today, where chemical weapons, for example, are used on innocent people? How can God create that kind of world? If he does, then he would be a God with a contradiction. I think this is the point that we need to drive home to especially state-run Christians and even evangelicals. Too often they sort of see the Christian ideal as something that's coming, in the next world. They're not sure. They're not really too clear on what is going to happen to this world. From that perspective, we know that we were not originally created in this way. So, and it's important that we understand this, that we were not created in this way. We were not created with a contradiction within ourselves. That contradiction came as a result of something that happened after the creation. And that, of course, that's the original sin. That's the disobedience of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. That is the sexual fall. So now we have the lineage of Satan. As Jesus said, you are the father of the devil. Yes. He was telling us that we have a different lineage. The devil is our father. And Paul says that we can have the spirit of adoption. But when will we have not just the spirit of adoption, but the spirit of direct sons and daughters? That's what comes through the holy blessing. And that is why the holy blessing that Father initiated in 1960 and continues today through the second king is so precious. And that is why Satan has tried to attack it so hard. And that is why at the False Foundation Day in February 2013, Satan attempted and largely succeeded in taking back and destroying all the blessed families, the blessed couples that God and True Father had created since 1960. And that's why we are so thankful that the second king has reestablished that connection with Father, and is with Father was able to give us a chance to come back to him, to return to his authority. And if anybody is out there who has not yet returned to True Father's authority, who's listening to this broadcast, I encourage you to do it now. You got to come back. You got to come back. Father sacrificed too much for you to just throw that blessing away. Please come back. All right, and there's always a way to come back. There's always a way. There's always a path to God. There's always a path to Jesus. There's always a path to True Father. Don't ever think that you are so far distant from Father that you cannot return. Please don't ever think that. There's always because you are the one sheep that has gone astray. True Father will put the other 99 in the pen and put them securely, save them, and he will go out looking for you. And he is looking for you, and he is working in your heart right now. He is working in your heart. I'm sure you've had dreams. I'm sure you've had inspirations. There have been times when you were inspired to remember what it was like when you were in True Father's authority. Please act on those inspirations, and please follow up on those messages that True Father is giving you, and please return to True Father's authority now. You can do that you can do that very easily. You don't have to make it a public thing. You can get the new holy wine that the second king has put out. You can get the holy water, the holy salt, and a sash that if someone you know has a blessing kit, you can get it from them. You can ask them to multiply their holy wine for you, or you can order a blessing kit online from the Sanctuary Church, a blessing from the Sanctuary Church website, and you can be blessed. You can participate in the blessing in your own home, with your wife, and your children, if you have any. And this will be something that you can register if you want, or this can be something that just you and God know about. All right? So please return to True Father's authority. And please return to his lineage. This is so important. Okay, let's take a break, and then we'll come back with more news from a Choniga perspective after this.
Boy, wasn't that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially, it's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah, Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, you know, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah, model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum. But it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So
that sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 14th, 2018. We're looking, of course, making sure that we don't miss anything on the Syria situation. I was going to go to other news now, but just before I do that, and I will, but before I do that, I just want to pick up a couple of new information that's coming in. So Putin says that Russia is going to call for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. He's calling it an act of aggression, and Russian military claims now that 71 out of 103 cruise missiles launched by the U.S., Britain, and France were shot down. So that's basically what's new on that. All right. We'll see. But the fact that Russia is responding very strongly to this is a cause for concern, especially the phrase characterizing this as an act of aggression is very worrisome. But they are going to make a case, I guess, at the UN Security Council today. All right, let's look at what other news is on the Drudge Report this morning. Boom, Hard Rock founder to sell Malibu spread at record $110 million. Leaked Apple memo, 12 employees arrested for leaking to press. Spy cameras know what we're thinking and feeling. Road devices detect fine drivers using phones. A new DUI policy, refuse breath test. Cop will seek instant warrant for blood test. She's back, Hillary headlining a DNC fundraiser. McAuliffe, I'd beat Trump. Terry McAuliffe wanting to go up against Trump, I guess, in 2020. Hollywood writers coach progressive candidates as left plots a course. FDA bans sale of caffeine in bulk directly to consumers. And April blizzard brings largest spring snowfall to Minnesota. 80 miles an hour wind gusts. A meteorologist on-air meltdown over endless winter. Well, yesterday and today we're having a respite from the endless winter today. But here, I think tonight it's not winter really. I mean, a low of 38 is not exactly winter, but it's going to be chilly tonight. Trillions upon trillions of viruses fall from the sky each day. Hidden radioactive objects all around us. Crazy in USA. This is the DrudgeReport.com's daily sort of amalgamation of how crazy things are in America. College hosts no whites pool party. Tourist mugged at knife point for MAGA hat. That happened in New York. Man climbs church steps off roof after running naked through neighborhood. Okay, that's crazy. Electrified road charges vehicles as they drive. Yeah, he seems to have the same article twice. Comey throws the book at president. This is his book that's coming out on Tuesday, and excerpts are released to the media on Thursday so that they can help him drive up sales. But the Fox, we read a book report or book review on Fox yesterday that encouraged the consumers to skip it. I probably will do that. Former FBI Deputy Director faulted in scathing Inspector General report. Details of magazine says Democrats won't immediately call for impeachment if Rosenstein is fired. Rosenstein was taken to the White House night before last, I believe, and he spoke with Donald Trump directly, and then after coming out, he just sort of went someplace, didn't appear at a press conference that he was supposed to go to, just sort of went someplace else, and not exactly sure where he went. Scooter Libby pardoned. Scooter Libby being the chief of staff, former chief of staff of Dick Cheney. I wonder what kind of deal that came about from. That's be interesting to know that. Message to Mueller. Let's see here. Lagerfeld fed up with the hashtag #MeToo. I don't want pants pulled about. Join a nunnery. Sex workers devastated. A look to alternatives after back page closure. Apparently, prostitutes are very concerned that this Backpage.com website was taken down by the FBI, because now they say they're going to have to go out on the street and find their clients on the street. Well, I'm sure they'll work out something. A Thomas Jefferson statue vandalized, a racist plus rapist on his birthday. Rapist, of course, referring to the fact that he had a mistress who was a slave. 10% of Facebook users delete accounts? ? Conservative street artists banned from Twitter. Yeah, the MSM is really working with the progressive, or I don't know, progressive fascists, leftist fascists, I would call them, because they're really clamping down on freedom of speech. Classic liberalism means that even if I don't agree with you, I will fight for your right to say what you're saying. So classic liberalism allows for, even encourages and protects speech that they don't agree with. So if I go into a liberal university and as a conservative and I want to speak there, classic liberals would protect my right to speak there. But what we have today is that people who call themselves liberal are shutting down conservative speech on college campuses, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and other places. So this is not liberalism in any sense of the word. This is actually fascism. That's what it is. You don't see conservatives shutting down liberals, or leftists. You don't see conservatives shutting down leftists. They're the fascists, the leftist fascists. But now we see that conservative street artist has been banned from Twitter. The Elephant Whisperer, man who stops charging 7-ton beasts by raising his hand. Well, that's nice. I hope he never misses. Sitting at desk all day may damage your brain. Yeah, get out into the nature. Get out in nature. Do some jujitsu training. Don't just sit at the desk all day. Oil, $100. Oil prices apparently going up, maybe especially with what's going on in Syria. Gas prices spike. Yikes. NFL alleges widespread fraud and concussion settlement. China to grow flowers on dark side of the moon. What on earth is that all about? We'll get into that when it comes up. Noose tightens around Trump lawyer under criminal investigation for months. Fixer is in a fix. And here, let's see, cable news race Thursday, April 12th. MSNBC Madao, we see won the audience race, see who could get the biggest audience. Boehner, deficit will be #1 issue. Huge whipsaw coming. Ominous start to earnings season. GM cuts hundreds of jobs as car sales slide. Russia says Britain staged a Syrian chemical attack. Putin polishes his satellite buster. Armada of U.S. warships steaming towards the Middle East. Scientists, a nuke attack on D.C. would kill 280,000 within 48 hours. Why are they bringing that up now? Is someone going to do this attack? Allahu Akbar shouting woman threatens to blow self up at Cannes festival. And more men wearing makeup. Let's look at this. China plan to grow flowers on the dark side of the moon. Why, I guess, is the question. China hopes to create a mini biosphere on the dark side of the moon with flowers and silkworms sustaining each other as they grow on the lifeless lunar surface. What's this all about? Come on now. The unprecedented plan to create life in outer space is the most intriguing part of China's lunar probe mission later this year and could be a major boost for dreams that humans will one day live on the moon. I'm not sure exactly who's dreaming this dream of humans living on the moon. The Second King has said that the elite want to get off the earth before, the sort of the end of life situation occurs here, whether it's a nuclear war or virus or whatever, that they want to set up their own society. Maybe that's what China's doing. But I'm not dreaming of living on the moon, that's for sure. The insects plants potato seeds in Arabidopsis, a small flowering plant belonging to the mustard family, will be taken to the moon on board the Chang'e 4 lander and rover in December. They will be placed in an 18-centimeter tall bucket-like tin made from special aluminum alloy materials. 18 centimeters would be about 7 inches? Together with water, a nutrient solution, and a small camera and data transmission system. A small tube will direct natural sunlight into the tin to help the plants and potato seeds grow. Although known figuratively as the dark side, as it's unseen, the far side of the moon receives almost equal sunlight to the near side. The next stage of the mini ecological system will see the plants emitting oxygen, which will feed the silkworms hatching from their cocoons. The silkworms will then create a carbon dioxide and produce waste that will allow plants to grow, Chinese scientists say. Our experiment might help accumulate knowledge for building a lunar base and long-term residence on the moon. Professor Liu Hanlong, chief director of the experiment and vice president of Chongqing University, told Xinhua News Agency. Astronauts have previously grown plants in the International Space Station, while Chinese taikonauts grow rice in Arabidopsis on China's Tiangong 2 space lab. But those experiments were conducted in low Earth orbit at an altitude of about 400 kilometers. The environment on the moon, 380,000 kilometers from the Earth, is more complicated, Xinhua said. The move's gravity is only about 16% of the Earth's, which is considered a major barrier to the success of the project. The development of the living organisms would also be at risk from the harsh climate on the moon, where temperatures range from lower than 100 degrees centigrade to higher than 100 degrees centigrade. So lower than minus 100 degrees to higher than 100 degrees. Anyway, the chief designer of the experiment has said, we have to keep the temperature in the mini biosphere within the range from 1 degree to 30 degrees and properly control the humidity and nutrition. We will use a tube to direct the natural light on the surface of moon onto the tin to make the plants grow. Potato and Arabidopsis, I'll get that sooner or later, were chosen for the experiment because they grow quickly and can be easily observed by scientists. And potato could become a major source of food for future space travelers, said Professor Liu. China's plans to become the first country to softly land a probe to the dark side of the moon will represent the country's latest milestone in space. In 2003, it became the third country to put a man in space with its own rocket after the former Soviet Union and the United States. 10 years later, it became the third country to carry out a lunar rover mission. China aims to land a man on the moon sometime after 2030. Most observers say, while last year an official said it would not take long before Beijing approved manned lunar project. China's space program is seen as a symbol of the country's rising global stature and technical advancement, as well as the Communist Party's success in reversing the fortunes of the once impoverished nation. Wow, Telegraph really giving some Chinese propaganda there. Because let's remember what China is doing in the South China Sea. They're building man-made islands in the South China Sea for peaceful purposes, and then they put fighters on them and missiles on them. All right? So if they are developing the moon for peaceful purposes, there are going to be military weapons up there. I can guarantee you. The Chinese Communist Party, they're not just, come on, they're not just, what? What is this last? They're just doing this to what? To what is the Telegraph? What is their propaganda for China? Space program is seen as a symbol of the country's rising global stature and technological achievement, as well as the Communist Party's success in reversing the fortunes of the once impoverished nation. Is that all it is? It's a symbol? No, listen. Let's take the lessons of the South China Sea and not make the same mistake again and allow China to militarize the moon. This is where this is. That's exactly where this is going. Militarizing the moon. Growing flowers, silkworms on the dark side of the moon. Yes. All right. Scientists on Infowars.com. Scientists' nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. would kill 280,000 within 48 hours. Researchers developed a computer model of how chaos would unfold. 280,000 would be about a third of the population of Washington, D.C., I believe, at least within the confines of Washington. Amidst heightening tensions between the United States and Russia, researchers at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University have developed a computer model that predicts at least 280,000 people would die within 48 hours if a nuclear bomb went off in Washington, D.C. It seems a bit conservative to me. The scientists developed the program to predict the behavior of every individual in the city to help the government plan its emergency response. They discovered that a nuke exploding at a ground level in D.C. would destroy a city block and then shatter buildings for a mile in every direction. In the first scenario, people who did nothing and refused to evacuate would be immediately exposed to radiation, leaving 279,020 people dead in 48 hours. Given the utter and total dependence on people living in cities, one can imagine that this would be the most likely outcome. The study found that the best course of action was to take shelter immediately after the explosion before attempting to flee and seek health care. However, the simulation also found that many people would expose themselves to deadly radiation by trying to physically locate loved ones and family members. The researchers emphasized that it would be vital for the government to maintain cell phone service to prevent this from happening. While the world is hopefully a long way off nuclear Armageddon, tensions between the United States and Russia over Syria are growing. Professor Emeritus of Russia Studies at Princeton University and New York University, Stephen Cohen, told Tucker Carlson last night, "I am more worried than I have ever been in my life about a nuclear confrontation with Russia." Wow. 280,000 seems a rather conservative estimate for me. You only have about 700,000 people or so living within the square or partial square that is Washington, D.C., but then you have actually more than 1 million people living in Fairfax County, I know. And then in Montgomery and in Prince George's counties in Maryland, you have a lot of people living there. Yeah, I think at 280,000, I think is too conservative. But we hope we never have to actually find out. Okay, let's see. What we have elsewhere here. I think we read about Comey's book yesterday. I don't think we need to go over that again. But this thing about cars being fined while they're driving, that they're going to develop a smart roads. Drivers using mobile phones could be fined without even knowing they've been caught. This is in Australia. New high-tech cameras that detect drivers using their mobile phones without them even knowing and automatically issues fines could change everything. Wow. I guess turn off your phone, huh? Distraction is one of the leading causes of fatal road crashes in Australia, but new high-tech cameras that detect drivers using their mobile phones without them even knowing could change everything. A New South Wales police spokesman told news.com.au that officers currently use a variety of methods to detect drivers using their phones while driving. Line of sight by trained officers is the primary method of detection. However, long-ranged cameras have been used with success, and helmet cameras and motorcycle police continue to be used, the spokesman said. But that technology could soon be replaced by stationary cameras that automatically issue an infringement notice without the driver even realizing they've been sprung. New South Wales Police Highway Patrol Boss Assistant Commissioner Mike Corby told the 9 News there was emerging technologies coming out. So the way we are going to defeat this is by video evidence, by photographic evidence. And we are looking at everything possible around the world at the moment, and we think we'll get something in place fairly quickly, Mr. McCorby said. His comments came after New South Wales Minister for Roads, Melinda Pavey, put out a call on Tuesday for potential providers to present practical technology-based solutions to address the problem of mobile phone use in cars. Developing this technology would be a world first and is one of the priorities of our Road Safety Plan 2021 that we've announced, Mrs. Pavey said. So they're really cracking down on the mobile phone use while you're driving in Australia. But again, using technology to control people, it would seem. Yes, and that's the more and more the way that the things are going. And a new DUI policy refused breath test as seek instant warrant for blood test. Here, this is the Chicago Tribune reporting. And police in McHenry County in Illinois will be out for blood with drivers who refuse to take breath tests for suspicion of driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And the practice of officers immediately seeking blood draws from those who want to submit to a breath screen appears to be spreading, with Lake County also planning to adopt a similar policy. The strategy in many departments takes advantage of technology that allows police to generate an e-warrant that can be sent electronically to a judge for review right from a curbside traffic stop. Law enforcement authorities say their main targets are repeat offenders who not only are the biggest public hazards but also know how to game the system by refusing to take breath tests, making it harder for them to be successfully prosecuted. These repeat offenders are some of the most dangerous people out there, Lake County State Attorney Michael Nurheim said. It's a recipe for disaster. Critics counter that such tactics infringe upon constitutional rights or at best could be overly burdensome to emergency room staffs who might have to handle the blood draws. It's just another way for prosecutors and police to use fear and intimidation on ordinary citizens, said well-known DUI defense attorney Don Ramsell. Many police departments in the Chicago area already will seek blood draws from those who decline breath tests Before online e-warrants, some counties had a rotation of on-call judges who would review search warrants at night or on weekends, often at home. But generally, and in counties including DuPage, the practice is limited to more serious cases where there's been an accident with injuries or death, or a suspect appears to be a repeat offender. Kane County also was something of a pioneer in establishing targeted campaigns known as No Refusal Weekends, sometimes geared around events like St. Patrick's Day or the Super Bowl about a decade ago. But McHenry County's shift marks a significant expansion of the policy, which will go into effect Sunday in Algonquin, Cary, Harvard, Huntley, Jonesburg, Lake in the Hills, McHenry, Springbrook, Spring Grove, and Woodstock. All right, so cracking down again, controlling again. I don't drink, and I certainly don't drink and drive, but this seems to be another more control. The important difference between God and Satan is that God trusts his children. God trusts his children, you know, and Satan does not. God says, hey, you know what? I created these kids. I gave them an original mind. I gave them a conscience. I gave them the word of God. And okay, yeah, they're sort of acting up right now and sort of rebelling and all that, and causing a lot of trouble, and it really hurts me. But eventually I know they're going to come around. Satan, on the other hand, says, I don't trust these people. You know, I can't let them have guns, because if they do, they'll point their guns at me, and I have to control them. I have to control them. And so Satan wants to centralize power. God, because he trusts his children, wants to disseminate power, to decentralize power. But Satan wants to always centralize power and always increase control of the population. And these two articles in Australia and in Chicago seem to have that common thread of controlling, more control over people. And speaking of controlling people, FDA bans sale of caffeine in bulk directly to consumers. Why on earth would they want to do that? What's wrong with having caffeine in bulk? Small amounts of pure caffeine products have proven to be dangerous and even fatal, regulators say. But then again, you know, okay, if they've proven to be fatal, then tell us that, and people will not take them. I don't take caffeine, pure caffeine. Online shopping has made it easy for consumers to affordably buy highly concentrated caffeine in bulk, whether to mix it into a workout shake or using it as an alternative to a morning coffee. However, U.S. regulators said that small amounts of pure caffeine products have proven to be dangerous and even fatal. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has issued a guidance banning the sale of pure or highly concentrated caffeine in powder or liquid forms as a dietary supplement in large quantities directly to consumers, calling it a significant public health threat. The FBI is prepared to take steps right away to begin removing illegal products from the market, the agency said in a statement Friday. A single teaspoon of powdered pure caffeine can contain about 3,200 milligrams of caffeine, equal to the amount of caffeine in about 20 to 28 cups of coffee. Wow. That's a lot of caffeine. The agency said that consumers can easily consume too much caffeine when they have access to bulk amounts in liquid and powdered forms. Substituting a teaspoon for a tablespoon for a teaspoon, or mistakenly adding the clear caffeine liquid instead of another, like vinegar, in a recipe. Highly concentrated caffeine consumption has been linked to at least 2 deaths, otherwise healthy individuals in recent years, the agency said. Again, it's about control. All right? Just give us the information. Give us the information. Educate us. Tell us, you know, this stuff will kill you, and we won't take it. But to, you know, create a new regulation and say, oh, no, we can't trust you. You're too immature. You don't know what's good for you, so we're going to ban this. You know, again, the FDA isn't trying to stop dietary supplements containing caffeine, such as pre-measured caffeine packets or pills, which are viewed as posing less of a health risk. The new guidance is also not aimed at prescription or over-the-counter drugs containing caffeine or conventional foods like caffeinated sodas. In 2015 and 16, the agency issued letters to 7 distributors of pure powdered caffeine, saying their products were dangerous and presented a risk of harm to consumers. Since then, the FDA said it has seen a rise of similar products being sold online. All right, it's 7 o'clock. Let's take a break for a few minutes, and then we'll come back with more news from a Chonya perspective. Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 14th, 2018. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon. And I want to start this hour with a story about a brave woman. I don't like to use the word brave too often, but I think in this case it might be appropriate. A woman declines to sing national anthem at minor league game because she can't bring her gun. After being offered an opportunity to sing the national anthem before a Nevada minor league baseball game, a woman has decided to turn it down after learning that she can't bring her gun to the stadium. Alicia Wolcott was picked by the Reno Aces to sing after she submitted an audition tape in March, she told Fox News. But after she and her husband went to the stadium on Saturday to attend the game as spectators, they saw security included metal detector wands, which she claimed was a new measure this year. Upon walking up to the stadium, we saw the normal bag checks, and past that were men stopping guests and using the wand metal detectors before entering the game, which was an action just implemented this baseball season, Wolcott said. Wolcott, who has a Glock 43 9mm pistol and obtained a concealed weapons permit in 2018, told the Reno Gazette-Journal that she wanted to carry the weapon to games to protect herself. The primary reason I am a gun owner is because I live in a country where the basis of my liberty and freedom is a God-given right to protect myself from anyone, she told Fox News. And I desire to live in such a way that I protect this right all the time, anywhere I go. To put it simply, I want the option to be able to carry my gun. That is the beauty of this liberty. I get the choice whether or not I want to protect myself at any time or place. In a statement to Fox News, Reno Aces president Eric Edelson said the organization will always place fan safety as our top priority at our stadium. We have joined every other ticketed sports facility in Reno, as well as every Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer venue in the United States in the use of metal detection, he continued. The list of prohibited items at Greater Nevada Field has remained unchanged since our inception in 2009. Wolcott said she was extremely excited when offered the chance to sing, something she grew up doing, and said she considered it an honor to perform the anthem. Well, all of that, it was extremely difficult for me to make the decision to turn it down, she said. She said she could have chosen to not bring her gun to the game with her, but it wouldn't have been because I had the option, she explained. It would have been forced, and that's the problem. They are taking away my freedom to choose whether or not to protect myself. She decided to inform the organization through a letter, she said, in which she wrote, I will not sing our national anthem at a place that seeks to strip me of my Second Amendment rights, nor will I be attending any future events at the Aces ballpark as long as this is taking place. She told the organization about how she'd been a longtime supporter of the team and went to the games every year, but after spotting the metal detectors, she said she and her husband had a choice to make. My husband and I took a long time to consider our options at Saturday's game. Do we simply place our protection elsewhere and walk freely into the game, thereby giving up and giving in to this deterioration of our rights, the letter said? Or do we walk away from something we both love and take a stand against this movement, which has good, pure motives, but makes tyranny even more possible? As I am sure you are well aware, we walked away. She added that she considered sharing her opinion on the matter at the game in a sort of Colin Kaepernick style, but opted not to, saying she has too much respect for the national anthem and the time dedicated for it. All right. So this woman standing up for her rights, and hope that she will inspire others to do the same. I'm trying to get the NRA TV. Okay, I see what's wrong. I sometimes have trouble with the Chrome, Google Chrome browser. Often does not pick up certain images or certain images. I'm not sure why that is. So I have to switch browsers to my Microsoft browser. What's this called? Electric, or what is it called? Anyway, the Microsoft browser. And once I switch it, no, still not coming up. That's interesting. I'm trying to bring NRA TV here. Oh, yeah, okay, now we got it. Oh, okay. I had it and then I lost it. What's going on now? Okay, I see. All right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's right. I don't have a connection. I don't have the HDMI connection, do I? Maybe the tech team, can you go to www.nratv.com? You got it? Okay. Then you see the Relentless 04/12/2018. I think it's the newest edition. Anyway, this is about Bank of America buckles to pressure before it was even exerted, promising to discriminate against gun owners nationwide. The new operating choke point. Dana will talk about that at the top of the show with Liz Mayer and Jim Hansen. Have you got it? Okay, let's go ahead and play that. Can you play it so I can see it as well?
To the pressure before it was even exerted, promising to discriminate against gun owners nationwide. The new Operation Choke Point, we'll talk about that at the top of the show with Liz Mayer and Jim Hansen. Plus, Vermont's governor, a Republican, goes rogue on your Second Amendment rights. Wisconsin claims opposing the NRA is the key to winning Paul Ryan's soon-to-be empty seat, and everyone is convinced, and asterisk everyone, that the blue wave will be led by anti-Republican millennials. All of this, plus Candace Owens and Dr. Robert Hyung. It's Thursday. We're live from Dallas. This is Relentless. Now, it's no shock, at least not if you've been paying attention, that the progressive left is going after businesses that will not conform to the gun grabbers' agenda. And that's not just through boycotts or threats on social media. In fact, Democrats themselves are more than happy to jump into the fray and wield the power of the nanny state to make their rabid base happy. For instance, just look at Sinclair Broadcasting Group. We've talked about this before. Earlier this week, we've discussed how the left is terrified that they're not kissing the progressive ring and mimicking the activism of MSNBC and CNN. The Washington Free Beacon has a report up today about how Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker, among others, have beseeched the Federal Communications Commission to probe Sinclair. And this is after Dick Durbin's letter that was presented to Ajit Pai at FCC just earlier in the week. Now, here's some choice excerpts from this letter. I'm fascinated. They say that we write to express our grave concerns regarding Sinclair Broadcasting Group's conduct. And they continue by saying this conduct affects its fitness to hold its existing broadcast licenses and its fitness to acquire even more broadcast licenses through the proposed merger with Tribune Media Company. I want to stop right there because that's really what is bothering them. It's that upcoming merger with Tribune Media Company, because that's going to make Sinclair a major player in the broadcasting game, to rival Fox News in terms of quantity of stations, quantity of homes, eyeballs watching. That is what people in particular, and by people I mean the Dick Durbins and the Elizabeth Warrens and the Cory Bookers, etc. That's why they're concerned. Now, they continue in this letter. They say, in particular, we have strong concerns that Sinclair has violated the public interest obligation inherent in holding these broadcast licenses. They say Sinclair may have violated the FCC's longstanding policy against broadcast licensees deliberately distorting news by staging, slanting, or falsifying information. They're mad because all of those local affiliates were asked, and the reporters were asked to read a statement. It was the same statement across the country, and they all said that fake news was bad and that we need more truth in reporting, which apparently is absolutely abhorrent and shocking to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker. And note, by the way, that all of the individuals that are signing this letter, that the ones the big names that are on this letter, they're all throwing their hat in the ring for 2020. You know that they're all exploring this. So they say that multiple news outlets report that Sinclair has been forcing local anchors to read the Sinclair-mandated scripts, warning of the dangers of one-sided news stories plaguing our country over the protests from local news teams, end quote. Now, remember, the protest, and we covered that earlier, actually later last week, was one individual at one station who actually was a very far left progressive activist, and he made a huge deal upon his resignation. He said he resigned because he didn't feel comfortable reading this statement, and everybody in the media made a huge deal about it, and they acted as though that this was, this was really not the exception, this was the rule, and they just really blew it out of the water. It was this one dude who was a progressive activist. He just was looking for this opportunity. Now, incredibly, even as they specifically attempt to deny Sinclair their own First Amendment rights, these senators, they cite the First Amendment as the basis of their objection, writing, and I quote, "As strong defenders of the First Amendment," and I don't try to choke over the irony, "guarantees of free speech and freedom of the press, we are alarmed by such practice. In the United States, the airwaves belong to the American people." I could re-say that. I could actually repeat that and sound like Bain. Doesn't that, no, not the part. I mean, just like the last sentence, because doesn't that sound like something Bain would say? It belongs to you, the American people. It's exactly, I mean, it came right out of Batman, right? The Federal Communications Commission is responsible for ensuring that broadcast licensees, continuing with their letter, use the public airwaves to serve the public interest. Okay, all right. These senators also say that the FCC should, quote, investigate. They should investigate, that's what the FCC is saying, this whole production of distorted news reports. They say that it fails the public interest test, which is fascinating to me. I mean, they say that the airwaves belong to the American people, even as they can attempt to control it through government fiat, despite that none of the American people, no one has issued a single complaint about Sinclair. It sounds more as though they're pushing an agenda to me. It's an old agenda. I mean, the left pushed for years and years to institute the so-called fairness doctrine as a way to usurp the free market of ideas by forcing radio stations to carry progressive radio hosts that listeners simply they've shown no interest in listening to. The free market has spoken, and I love how they always talk about the free market, except when it concerns radio, which is fascinating to me. Democrats at the time argued that it was fair to have both sides of the debate get equal time. And what they secretly knew was that the radio stations would just be turned off, since consumers had already shown that they had zero interest in listening to progressive politics on AM radio. Now, this would have crippled profitability of the stations. I work in radio. I know it would have. And of course, it made it harder to even keep the more popular conservative hosts on air. It would have hurt the sales department because you would have seen listening levels down. You would have seen engagement down. This would have showed up on PPM. It would have all of it. But it was a win-win as far as they were concerned. Either radio kept going with their shoehorn hosts forced onto an unwilling public, or the whole industry just goes kaput. And they never achieved their dreams. And as the blogosphere and online news became a bigger thing, they seemed to set their sights there instead. But I always knew that they would work to somehow revive this whole idea of fairness and equal time, all of this jazz. And it seems to me like this could be the opening salvo in that effort. Now, Sinclair can do what it wants to do, and I understand the whole argument about public airwaves, but are you telling me that it somehow compromises public ownership of these airwaves simply because these anchors on these different stations stated that there's an epidemic, for the lack of a better way to put it, of fake news and one-sided, and that was key in actually this statement, one-sided presentations in news, and that it was important to make sure that they uphold truth in reporting. Now, how, in any respect at all, how in the world is that considered divisive enough where you have to have the government get involved and start investigating Sinclair? I remember when I was a kid, and it was Twisted Sister and Dee Snider. And I remember Tipper Gore at the time, and this was the Moms Demand Action Against Rock Music. They led the charge in Washington, D.C. to try to control the speech of rock and roll and all these different musicians. And Dee Snider led the charge. I remember, I think that it even became part of one of Twisted Sister's videos. And it's always been one party in particular that has attempted to crack down on any kind of free speech or any kind of expression that somehow bucks the narrative that one particular party in Washington, D.C. wants to persist with. And that's what we're seeing here. So we're going to keep our eyes on this, because right now more and more lawmakers are signing their names or issuing letters of their own to Sinclair, saying that the government really should have some editorial oversight on what Sinclair is doing, because how dare Sinclair talk about truth in reporting?
Yes. All right, thank you. Yeah. Sinclair, that wasn't the video that I was expecting. I was expecting one about Bank of America, but maybe that was another episode of that NRA TV broadcast, because Bank of America has been cracking down and not saying that it will not do business with businesses that sell or manufacture guns. Yeah, can we play that one? Maybe that's the one. Is that the one that I was looking for?
Taxpayers that save their backsides, right? Let's throw some of this up in the monitor for me to see too, by the way. So where did all of these banks and that monitor right down there, where did all of these banks and virtue signalers get the idea to influence through withholding? I mean, they're choking out these undesirables by making it impossible for them to compete. Remember? It sounds really familiar. How did that come about? That the company that was a loser until the government bailed them out and made them a winner now feels like they're A-OK to start picking winners and losers on their own. Simple. The government showed them the way. Operation Choke Point was something that unfolded during the Obama era. I know you all remember that, right? Operation Choke Point. And this has eerie similarities. What's happening right now is incredibly similar to Operation Choke Point. There's a bit of a difference, though. But I do wonder where Bank of America got this idea. Bank of America that received a $20 billion bailout from the American taxpayer. And not just Bank of America. You had Citibank that got $15 billion. And you also had Wells Fargo that, from what I understand, received $25 billion in taxpayer money. So how did we get to this point? Here to talk about Operation Choke Point, what it was, and how we're watching it unfold in a different respect right in front of our eyes is Republican strategist Liz Mayer. Liz, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you. So I understand, first off, this is very similar, and you've made this observation before, and we talked a little bit about this last week on this program where it concerned Citibank and Wells Fargo, but now Bank of America is involved, and it seems more and more of these institutions are getting involved and targeting gun manufacturers and law-abiding gun owners. This is incredibly similar to Operation Choke Point. Explain that a little bit for our viewers, if you would.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So I'm one of the people that first uncovered what was going on with Operation Choke Point, where you basically had agencies of the federal government that were in the banking arena under President Obama and his administration, pretty much going and saying, well, these are risky businesses, and we're going to urge banks to not do business with them and to cut off their ability to move money through the financial system. And, unsurprisingly, when you have government regulators come out and say things like that, regulated institutions tend to take that very seriously. And so what we started seeing was that there was this coordinated effort basically to go after industries that statist liberals, if I'm being totally honest, just don't happen to like very much. Now, foremost among those were, of course, anything that can be categorized as the gun industry, which, of course, liberals hate. But we also had a lot of targeting of sort of alternative financial lenders, online payday lenders, these kinds of things. Some peer-to-peer lending could arguably fall into that category. You also had some targeting, interestingly, of the adult industry, the adult entertainment industry, which is a little bit funny because we all think that liberals are super friendly with like the porn industry. But when push came to shove, actually, they were very happy to use the levers of government to try to cut off those people's access to the financial system, too. And so there was a tremendous amount of outcry. It was a real investigative story that was broken. Ultimately, it was shut down. But it hasn't, as you noted, it hasn't been fully eliminated because some people have taken it upon themselves to urge a sort of Operation Choke Point redux just being conducted by the private sector. Now, where I originally saw this idea coming from, I believe, was Andrew Ross Sorkin, who obviously is a fairly influential commentator who has a lot of clout with the financial sector. And he was sort of urging banks and financial institutions of their own accord to basically cut off access to the financial system for industries that he considers nefarious and that a lot of liberals consider nefarious. But it really seems as though it's taken off. And this is obviously going to be a big concern for everybody who's watching this program and anybody who's concerned about Second Amendment rights, but also a lot of people who aren't concerned about Second Amendment rights and want to be able to do something like take out a loan to get their car fixed at 3 a.m. when, guess what, their bank's not open. Or, frankly, people who want to watch a little old-fashioned porn in the privacy of their own home.
What gets me about this, Liz, and I understand the argument that people make where they say, well, these are private institutions to a certain degree, and they can do whatever they want. They can make the determination as to whether or not they want to lend to one group or another. But is that argument, though, I struggle with whether or not that argument's valid, considering they took so much taxpayer dollars years ago in order, I mean, not really too long ago, in order to stay afloat. Some of them have paid most of it back, but the bottom line is that they wouldn't exist still to this day, at least not in the fashion that they are, were it not for the taxpayer, the same taxpayer that they're discriminating against now. So is it fair to make the argument that it's a private institution, so, just let it go?
I mean, it's fair to make the argument that it's a private institution, but by the same token, we operate in a free market and consumers have the ability to walk with their feet. And we've seen that when we've seen other companies that have gone out and have targeted gun owners or NRA members. At the end of the day, my job is I'm a communications professional. Many of the clients that I advise are clients who find themselves in crisis situations. And what I would say to these banks and these financial institutions who are considering this type of action is you better think about the reputational damage. Sure, it's your institution. You can do what you want with it. You can set the rules. But the Second Amendment is something that a lot of Americans feel is obviously incredibly core to who we are as a country. People feel that it is a God-given right. I know I certainly feel very strongly about that. And people need to bear in mind that the reason that boycotts traditionally have had a lot of power is because consumers will walk with their feet and with their money. And if people start doing that with institutions that take deposits, fundamentally, that's going to cause problems for the bank's ability to function and do well in business. Every time you put money in the bank, what you're actually doing is enabling the bank to lend that money on and make more money off of it. So if you suddenly start having every NRA member, every gun owner, everybody who's ever valued their ability to take out that loan at 3 a.m. when their bank's not open, saying, hey, we don't want to do business with people who are going to be discriminatory like this and do this redux of Operation Choke Point, these banks are going to have real problems in terms of their consumer base. And I would say to them, if I were advising anybody who's going down this route, you need to think very carefully about what that actually does to your bottom line. Because if you piss off enough people, it's going to hurt you financially.
It will, and it could also even cause now, there's some government action. 16 Republican congressmen, according to a report from Peter Hassan, are asking the GSA to reevaluate the $700 billion contract with Citibank, one of the institutions involved in all of this, as a result of their anti-Second Amendment policies. Todd Rokita from Indiana, they sent a letter to GSA Administrator Emily Murphy just yesterday. They said terminate the contract in response to Citibank's announcement, which restricting its clients' participation in gun sales. We might, whether or not, I feel like it's coming to a head because now you'll have people who walk away, but also I get nervous when government begins to take revenge for the taxpayer because I feel like this is something that we can do ourselves. And I know that they probably have good interests in their mind, but this kind of stuff makes me just a little nervous.
Yeah, Dana Lasham is making a good point, and the point that I wanted to make as well. But this makes me grateful that in the Chinese Constitution, no bank can have more than 1% of the banking industry as a whole. In other words, the reason that the Bank of America and Citibank and perhaps others going forward are able to do this is because they are mega banks and because they effectively are in a position to be able to control our behavior. They say, okay, during the Obama administration, they were saying, okay, we're not going to do business with businesses that are in what they call risky or at-risk businesses possibly involved in money laundering or drugs or something like that, or pornography. We're not going to do business with those kinds of. So okay, well, and at that point you might say, okay, well, yeah, those are all bad things. It's good that they're not doing business with them. But then they come around now. And say, okay, we're not going to do business with companies that are involved in gun manufacture or gun sales. And now it gets to the point where we say, hey, what? All of a sudden, they're trying to force the leftist agenda on us. They're trying to social engineer. It's a forcible social engineering. And all of a sudden, they're in a position to dictate to us our behavior, our economic behavior. And so, but now, as Dana Lash warned, now the 16 Republican congressmen are asking for the General Services Administration to reconsider a $700 billion government contract with the Bank of America. So that actually makes the matter even worse, because now you're using government to go after these banks, whereas taxpayers are perfectly capable of doing it on our own. NRA members, get our money out of Bank of America. Get our money out of Bank of America. I would put it into more sort of regional banks, small town banks, community banks, these kinds of places. Or, if you have money that you're not going to be spending immediately, frankly, I would not leave it in cash. Probably, my personal opinion, probably better off in some kind of hard asset like gold or silver or real estate. We can do this ourselves based on our own judgment. And the earlier story about Sinclair Broadcasting is similar in that again, the power of government is being employed to crack down on the activities of a private institution. This Sinclair Broadcasting had its journalists read a statement saying that, okay, well, there's a proliferation of fake news, so let's make sure that we give both sides. But if Sinclair Broadcasting wants to do that, then how can the FCC have a problem with that? but and also I sent another link to the tech team just now. This is a link that you got it okay. That the King wanted us to show. Let's go ahead and show this link. This is what was her name? Liberty. Anyway, the title of the video is "Lessons Liberals Taught Me About Gun Owning," and it's by someone who calls herself the Liberty Doll. Let's watch the Liberty Doll.
So, without further ado, here are what I feel are the most important lessons that anti-gun liberals have taught me about being a gun owner. First off, number one, most important lesson is that we all have an itty-bitty little penis. Wait, what? Seriously, it is tiny. Like, so small it doesn't even exist. I mean, talk about overcompensation, am I right? As a gun owner, I am single-handedly responsible for every past, present, and future victim of gun violence, even though I've never personally hurt anyone. I hate children. It's totally true. Owning guns is really just a sort of symbol for my internal rage against children. Clearly, I hate children so much that even just looking at that picture makes me want to go out and buy an AR-15, even though that's a completely ridiculous false dichotomy. On a similar note, every person that says they own a gun to protect their families is lying. Gun owners are so heartless that we don't actually have families and only reproduce through asexual budding and possibly secret government cloning experiments. I mean, why else would we be so afraid of the government? It's not like tyrannical governments are responsible for over 200 million deaths over the last century. By the way, those governments are the only people who should be allowed to have guns. Because I'm a gun owner, I'm also an uneducated redneck idiot. Well, I guess I don't need this master's degree from a fancy Boston college anymore. I'm automatically a stupid Trump, Romney, Bush, insert conservative here voter. Did you just assume my political orientation? My correct personal noun is libertarian. The only reason I ever got into guns is because I'm actually weak and cowardly. Does this look weak to you? Do you even lift, bro? True bravery is urinating in self-defense. We also all fantasize about being cop soldiers back in the days of the Wild West, so if you really want to get rid of guns, you just have to invent time travel and we'll all head back to 1881 Tombstone. Everything I own is a fully automatic 100% military weapon that shoots heat-seeking projectiles at 6,000 rounds per minute. Even this BB gun. Why? Because I'm a badass. And I'm still making up for not having a dick. Or something. As a gun owner, I also happen to be a violent sociopathic terroristic murderer, and I totally used my ninja terrorist skills to get past the FBI's background check and my state's interview with the chief of police. Booyah! Really though, if all gun owners were crazy murderers, wouldn't we just have like killed off everyone by now? I mean, America has a lot of gun owners. I mean like millions. So every day that you don't hear about a legal gun owner killing someone, that means the millions of gun owners didn't shoot anyone that day. And those are some pretty good statistics for a group of bloodthirsty murderers. No one wants to take my guns, registered trademark. Right, and that's why California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, just to name a few, all have laws in place for gun confiscation and surrender. That's them not wanting to take my guns. At the very moment that I bought my first gun, I forfeited my rights to privacy, personal property, and autonomy. In fact, as a gun owner, my right to personal property and security is automatically inferior to everyone else's because feelings. Now, as a female gun owner, I only like guns because my dad, boyfriend, or pimp made me. Wait, so are women intelligent, sentient individuals capable of our own thoughts and opinions? Or just submissive whores that do everything men tell us without question? Pick one, liberals, you can't have it both ways. Guns, ammo, and high-capacity magazines are the only cause of all the death and destruction in the world. If it weren't for guns, everyone would be all happy and riding unicorns in magical rainbow la-la land. But guns just had to come and ruin it by being violent all the time. You know, I keep hearing this one, but I think my guns are sick or else not very smart because they don't really do anything. They don't even, like, sneak out of their safe at night. I hope you guys paid attention because these are some serious life lessons here. If it weren't for anti-gunners, I'd have no idea how stupid, weak, and subservient I am. Thank you, liberals and progressives, for showing me the error of my ways.
Is that it? Okay. All right, thank you. Liberty Doll there on YouTube. She has that's the title of her channel as well. Some of the other videos that she's put up, I see here, the true history of assault rifles, 5 facts to know if you hate guns, ultimate proof liberals know nothing about your guns, a fake gun store sold fake guns to fake people, find out, well, that's another one, that's another channel, okay. What else do we have from Liberty Doll? Gun control, MA just banned all semi-autos overnight. Check your female privilege, etc., etc. Yeah, she has a pretty good channel here. 35,000 people are subscribing to her right now. All right, so talking about the lessons that she has learned, about we own guns because of overcompensation for small sexual organs. That we have dreams of being cops and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People who want the state to have monopoly on lethal force make up all sorts of reasons and excuses. It's interesting that God gives us creativity. Most of the time we use that creativity to justify our sin. And the liberals in this case, I keep calling them liberals, I don't know why, leftist fascists in this case, continue to show that is in fact true. That they really want the power, all power, to be concentrated in the state. Mao Zedong said that all political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The corollary will be he who controls all barrels of all the guns controls all political power, right? So, based on what Mao Zedong said, you can see that the leftist fascists are trying to have it so that all political power is controlled by the state. They don't want the people to have political power. They don't want the people to have political power or any kind of power. They want their ideal world, there's their vision, their version of ideal world to be imposed from above, where people are carbon taxed, where people are, not allowed to drink sugary sodas, where people are, not allowed to do this or this or that. Everything else is banned, and children are indoctrinated into this gay sexual agenda at the schools. Their version of ideal world is imposed, because their version of an ideal world is a world where people are not trusted. We are not trusted. And that means what? Satan is the one that doesn't trust people. God is the one that does trust people. That is why Satan always tries to centralize power. God always tries to decentralize power, because God wants his children to be free, so they can practice creativity with responsibility. But those who are trying to take away guns, and those who don't want to allow guns, are always trying to centralize power. The Second Amendment people say is almost unique to the United States, and perhaps that is true in the developed world. I can't think of another country that has a similar constitutional guarantee for people to be able to bear arms. But in other countries, we see that power is centralized in the state. Japanese people will say, well, look at our country. Our country has a very, very low murder rate, and we have no guns. So this just shows that if you get rid of guns, you'll have a very, very low murder rate. Well, I would say that it's actually, Japan has a very, very low murder rate, because it is a de facto police state. And police determine who has human rights. This was demonstrated when our members, the Unification Church members, were kidnapped by kidnappers, by deprogrammers, and in some cases were placed in mental institutions forcibly, simply for the fact that they had been a member of the Unification Church. And in other cases, they were placed in apartments and apartment units, and in a room in an apartment unit, and imprisoned there for weeks, months, sometimes years. One person was imprisoned for more than 12 years while his deprogrammers tried to convince him to leave the Unification Church, to deny his faith in the Unification Church. And in some cases, these people have been able to break out of those prisons and go to a police station. But when they do that, the police take them back to their captors. So this demonstrates that in Japan, human rights are determined by the police. The police determine who has human rights and what human rights you have. So, but that is not the kind of society that God envisions. God envisions a society where we have freedom and responsibility. The kingdom of God is a kingdom of kings. So if we are to have that kind of a society, the kings need to have territory, need to have the means to defend that territory. In other words, the means to defend their families and their communities. Defending your community means to have a cooperative relationship with your gun-owning neighbors, so that and forming essentially a militia, and also as a nation, forming a militia, so that when the nation is attacked, the militia can go into action and defend the nation. And the Eternal Constitution is designed to keep power decentralized by keeping banks small. We'd have many banks, but each bank will be small, so that they cannot do the kind of thing that the Bank of America and Citigroup are doing today, as was in NRATV, where the banks start dictating to people what we can do and what kind of economic activity we can engage in, what kind of economic activity we cannot. Sure, they're private institutions, but they are much too big. They have become much too big if they are able to dictate our economic activity in that way. I'm grateful that the Eternal Constitution limits the size of banks to 1%. Any one bank is limited to 1% of the entire banking industry. That's very important. And Bank of America and Citigroup are just demonstrating to us how important that really is. And even to be able to establish a bank needs to be in China Constitution. There's no need for licensing. There's no, in fact, governments are not allowed to license, give out licenses. So anyone can start a bank. Anyone can take deposits and lend money. So it'd be easy to start a bank. And so there can be many banks. And the free market will weed out some, I'm sure. But this is the importance of keeping power decentralized in the kingdom of God, and making sure that the police power is not connected to state power. If the state can exercise its power through the police, then already the state is determining, as in Japan, who has human rights and who does not. Members of the Unification Church today in Japan don't have human rights in many cases. They are discriminated against in universities and in employment. In the university, there were cases where Unification Church second generation wanted to advance their studies to the next level, to the master's level, the doctoral level, but her advisor found out that she was a Unification Church member, or that her parents were Unification Church members, and he blocked her advancement. Cases where in employment also have to hide the fact that they're a Unification Church member in order to get a job. And also, similar to the Bank of America and Citigroup, most banks in Japan now will not lend money to a business that is related to the Unification Church. So in these ways, Unification Church members are severely discriminated against in Japan. And it's amazing that they have really, perhaps it's not amazing, perhaps it's just logical that the movement has grown so strongly in Japan. Unfortunately, right now, they're really most of them are kind of, off the rails and going to the Han Mother, but I have faith that they will return to True Father's authority at a certain time. Japan is kind of like an aircraft carrier. It's difficult for an aircraft carrier to change direction, but it will eventually. And when it does, it will be a big and huge change. But that's just talking about the gun rights also in Japan. God gave the Japanese people the right to bear arms as well. It's a natural right. They're given to all people, not just to Americans. Not just to Americans, but to all people. And governments around the world are blocking the exercise of that right because they are afraid of their people. What I hear from Koreans over and over and over and over and over and over and over again is that, well, if you give guns to Koreans, we're going to all get up and shoot ourselves, shoot each other, because we are hot-blooded. So I say to them, well, what about the Koreans who are living in Pennsylvania? They have the right to bear arms, but they're not shooting themselves or each other. They're not shooting each other. I don't hear any news like that. But for some reason, and almost 100% of Koreans, we've talked to them about gun rights, this is the first thing they'll say. And it's amazing how someone has just put that line, that thought into their head. Some kind of mass hallucination is going on there. Mass brainwashing is going on there. I mean, where does that originate from? I'd like to know. That if you give guns to Koreans, they will all shoot each other. It was obviously perpetrated by someone who does not want Koreans to defend their country. Anyway, as we get close to the 8 o'clock hour, let's go back to the Syrian story and see what else has developed during our broadcast. We have a new story on Fox. Syrian neighbors react to U.S.-led strikes with excitement, fear, and hope, it says. So Syrian neighbors, that would be the countries around Syria, I'm assuming. Let's see how they are reacting. Manbij, Syria, Obada Alstov, a 21-year-old opposition activist from the northern countryside of Homs, was woken up with a loud jolt and terror and tremor in the early hours of Saturday morning. It came as welcome surprise. The explosions were so loud, Alstoff told Fox News in the immediate aftermath. We had no idea what was happening, but we immediately expected that the international coalition was targeting the regime locations. The United States and its allies wasted little time before retaliating against the Bashar al-Assad regime over its use last week of chemical weapons, sending bombs raining down at a former missile base some 15 miles west of Homs. That's where the regime is believed to keep chemical weapon precursors stockpiled in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. According to the Pentagon officials, a number of facilities were struck: a chemical weapons storage facility, a chemical weapons equipment storage and crucial command post near Homs, and a scientific research facility in Damascus, believed to be the key in production of chemical and biological weapons. Al-Astaf lives just miles from the Scientific Research Center in the western countryside of Homs, in a rebel-held area besieged by Syrian forces. Immediately after the U.S.-led strikes, those in the neighborhood started calling one another and speculating what would happen next. Okay, so this is not an article about the surrounding countries, but around the neighbors of this particular reporter. All right, let's see if there's anything here on Drudge, if he has changed his headline at all. No, it does not look like that. Okay. All right, and let's see. Going to news, going to Google News. I got a email from someone about my reading of the story on Al Jazeera, and this person says, very grateful for all I learned every day through the King's Report. Just felt like mentioning that Al Jazeera is based in Qatar. According to Reuters, Qatar is supporting the rebels and will do so even if the U.S. leaves the region. So their report about Assad using chemical weapons might be true, but we need to question their objectivity. All right, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I'd like to thank this person for sending this email to me, and thank him for watching the King's Report. Appreciate it very much. Russia, Iran denounce airstrikes on close ally Syria. That's in the Wall Street Journal headline this morning. Let's see. Commentary, how Trump can neutralize Assad in Syria. Okay, let's go to this Wall Street Journal article. The Russia and Iran reactions. See what updates they can give us. Tehran warns of consequences to the U.S. Sounds like they're taking their script from Russia. U.S., UK, and France's actions, while Moscow accuses Washington of deepening a humanitarian catastrophe. Okay, they want me to subscribe to read the whole article, but it doesn't look like they have anything new that was not in other articles about the humanitarian catastrophe. Okay. All right, let's see. I don't see any significant developments on the Syria situation right now. Let's check out some other headlines. A report exposes China's forced confessions from human rights activists. Kind of a article, but let's look at it. Of course, the confessions by human rights activists are forced. I mean, I don't think anyone ever doubted that. But let's see what they say. A new report from a human rights group called Safeguard Defenders exposes China's practice of extracting forced confessions from imprisoned activists, many of them foreign nationals. The confessions are allegedly obtained with threats, torture, and fear, scripted and staged by the police and employed as propaganda both inside China and abroad. The report, titled Scripted and Staged, Behind the Scenes of China's Forced TV Confessions, describes how the authorities control every detail of the confession process, from what the detainees wear to what they say. The lucky prisoners are basically actors in a TV show with exceptionally long and grueling shoots. The unlucky ones are beaten, drugged, threatened with longer jail sentences, intimidated with threats of harm to their families, or told they will be killed if they do not play along. One man interviewed for the report said he was kept alone and helpless, in such a state of fear that he contemplated suicide. Another said his hair turned white from the enormous pressure and torture of it all. Now, you really can't, at least I cannot imagine the horror that these people are put through. It's kind of a torture situation that communist regimes subject their people to in order to keep them in line and use them for propaganda. Because under communism, human beings are just clumps of flesh and bone. There is no spirit, there is no soul, there is no God, and the torturers can do this without impunity because they don't have to fear any consequences in the afterlife. This is why godless communism is such a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. Safeguard Defenders stresses that forced confessions are an element of Chinese foreign policy. Detainees are most often dragged to the confessional video studio when international pressure is brought to bear against China. If allegations of torture are made, the detainee in question is likely to find himself sitting in front of a camera and reading a prepared statement that Chinese police have been taking great care of him. A prisoner held incommunicado might be made to say that he doesn't want to speak with his family. Foreign nationals are frequently forced to denounce their home countries. The report notes that at least 3 of its subjects are foreigners who were kidnapped by Chinese agents outside China's borders. Kidnapped by Chinese agents outside China's borders. One foreign detainee held by China for 2 years is 62-year-old Brit Peter Humphrey, an employee of the GSK pharmaceutical company. In an interview with the UK Sun published on Friday, Humphrey said he was arrested along with his Chinese-born wife, held with 12 other men in a tiny cell devoid of furniture, routinely underfed and deprived of sleep, drugged with sleeping pills to obtain a forced confession, and ultimately released only because the British government prodded the Chinese into admitting he was suffering from prostate cancer. Humphrey added that he believes his cancer became malignant because he was denied treatment while in Chinese custody. Another purpose of forced confessions is to grease the wheels of Chinese authoritarian justice system, which rarely fails to convict the accused. Many confessions involve subjects compelled to accuse other detainees, a role Safeguard Defenders describes as a supporting confessor. A great many forced confessions are extracted and televised before the prisoner stands trial for his alleged crimes. Safeguard Defenders suggest that such pre-trial confessions began declining in 2017 due to criticism of the obviously unfair practice from overseas and because the Chinese government developed a preference for videotaped confessions delivered during the trial. A growing preference for neutral confessions in relaxed settings such as hotel rooms has also been noticed. Such confessions look more natural and voluntary than the traditional jailhouse grilling. China's televised confessions are much more than simple admission of guilt. The report observes they often include statements of self-criticism, regret, and accusations against others. Suspects apologize to their families, their fans, and the Chinese government. They warn others not to repeat their mistakes. They plead for mercy and promise not to commit crimes again. When it comes to imprisoned human rights activists, China also likes to make them admit to seditious anti-China crimes. Beijing loves to dismiss critics of its appalling policies as saboteurs, subversives, and unreasonable malcontents. Safeguard Defenders argue that Chinese media have grown more preoccupied with spreading communist and nationalist propaganda under President Xi Jinping, and media companies have become active collaborators with Xi's government in the business of manufacturing forced confessions. To a dismaying extent, the Safeguard Defenders view this includes Hong Kong-based English-language publications such as the South China Morning Post. Yes, it's such a tragedy, so really heartbreaking to read the South China Morning Post these days. It used to be a pretty good newspaper. In fact, I think it was I used to think of it as the best English language newspaper in East Asia. Better than Japan Times for sure, better than anything in Korea, better than the Straits Times in Singapore, Bangkok Post. You know, those are the major English language papers in Manila Chronicle. But South China Morning Post was good. It gave a lot of inside information on what was going on in China. Willie Wollop Lamb had a great column. But now, it's become a part of their propaganda. It's just another propaganda mouthpiece. It's been completely co-opted. It's really heartbreaking. The report further accuses Beijing of using social media tools forbidden to Chinese citizens to influence foreign audiences and establishing partnerships with Western media operations that spread Chinese government propaganda to American and European audiences. This is happening in the New York Times and the Washington Post. What they do is they create a propaganda insert and they put it into the Wall Street Journal, or they put it into the New York Times. And New York Times and Wall Street Journal will say, "Oh, no, this was not created by our editorial department." But to the reader, it looks like it was. Partnerships with Western media operations: CNN, Facebook, Google. China's use of forced televised confessions warrants urgent global attention, the report concludes. The practice constitutes a human rights violation that not confined to China's borders. Foreign nationals count among the victims. Privately owned media from outside the mainland have been co-opted into filming and broadcasting them. Yeah. CNN, shame on you. All right, it's time for us to go do something else. Appreciate your being with us this morning, every morning from 5 to 8. Tomorrow is Sunday, so there will be no King's Report. And the next day is a holy day, the True Parents' Day, so there will also be no King's Report on Monday. And so the King's Report will be back on Tuesday morning at 5 a.m., 5 to 8 a.m. The King will be doing that himself, I'm sure. All right, thank you for joining us. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.